Hey everyone, it's ZachGP here, back with another post FP2 final thoughts video for F1 Fantasy. Now, as per usual, in this video, I'm going to be going over the best team selections and best strategies to use after we have got the best data after FP1 and FP2 on the Friday, just before those deadlines before the qualifying. Now, before we get into this video, just remember, to my left, you will see all of the drivers and constructors as assets in F1 Fantasy and the points they either need to go up or down in value in Monza. This is crucial for building budget, so keep an eye on it whenever you see this mug on screen, just so you can keep an eye on which drivers, at least for budget wise, look good to have in your teams. But without any more shenanigans, make sure to like and subscribe, comment down below if you need any more help after this video, and let's get started with Zach's do's and don'ts for assets heading into the Monza Grand Prix. Now, heading into the A-tier drivers that you should be using, it's actually quite a straightforward weekend for at least the first choice, and it has to be Oscar Piastri. Oscar Piastri has looked phenomenal. In Hungary, he had the pace over Norris. Norris had the strategy advantage. Piastri went and got a bleeding Grand Slam. He was phenomenal. In Zandvoort, Piastri also managed to get the pole and the win. He's been on form lately. He's been on fire. There's no doubt in my mind he is the most consistent choice as the A-tier driver to put especially your 2 times on every weekend now. But let's say you have a 2 A-tier driver team. There are a few more drivers you can use that could either be used as a differential or as a duo to the likes of Piastri. The first one that comes up is, of course, Lando Norris. Now, budget-wise, he's going to go down in value, so you have to keep that in mind. However, if there's anyone that would beat Piastri, it would be his partner in crime at McLaren. It's always going to be between those two, really, till the end of the season now. So Norris, as a differential, still works out on points. However, we've seen in practice sessions, even when he does do well, Piastri just finds that pace to out-qualify him anyway. So just be careful if you do want to go Norris. And then you have the likes of Charles Leclerc, potential driver of the day. If you want to go for something like that, again, that's more of a 4A build type look. If you want to go for a Ferrari driver of the day there, 100% Charles Leclerc is an option. Again, not for budget though. Now, heading into A-tier constructors, and straight away, as per usual, McLaren has to be on your team. McLaren, basically every single weekend, unless something drastic happens, will be scoring you the most points out of an A-tier constructor. And then after FP2, definitely which team looks the second best A-tier constructor would have to be Ferrari. So it definitely looks like now, if you're going for the 2 A-tier constructor teams, it will consist of McLaren and definitely Ferrari as well. Now, annoyingly, Hamilton with that 5-place grid penalty will harm it a little bit. However, let's hope he can get some overtake points and that will help as well. However, you could use the differential of Red Bull. Some Max Verstappen magic can always happen. Tsunoda didn't even look too bad in FP2. However, the clear-cut one is McLaren and Ferrari. Now heading into the B-tier drivers. And funnily enough, I'm really looking forward to doing this part of the tier list, because finally, now we can talk about drivers on points alone. This weekend, about 10 drivers in the B-tier side are usable realistically for looking at budget increases and points. So going through the actual best budget options, if you're just looking at budget building, you have the likes of Hadjar, who looks brilliant, Bortoletto, Alonso, Stroll, and Albon. If you're just focusing on budget, realistically, those are the 5 you really want to look for. Now, for points-wise on B-tier drivers, not just the budget alone, this weekend, it looks like a very clear-cut 2 main drivers you really want to try to put in your team if you have those transfers on the B-tier drivers, and it's the Williams boys. So you've got Carlos Sainz at 5.7. He looks like a steal right now. Remember, it's a lot about the points now. Even though he's one of the people who will struggle on budget a little bit more, still usable. He has to have a great weekend, but from what it looks like, he will achieve those points through that. And then, of course, Alex Albon. However, don't ruin your team getting to Alex Albon to make sure you have the budget to go there first. But then the other drivers who look good on points would be Isaac Hadjar, Nico Hulkenberg, Liam Lawson for actually the opposite effect, that he looks like he could qualify at the low end and that Racing Bull shouldn't be there. And then you also have Franco Colapinto. Again, similar reason to Lawson, however, it doesn't look like he's got pace. But if he just qualifies 20th, he's been good here in the past. Just stay out of trouble, and if there's a few DNFs, that'll be a half-decent 4.5 million driver to go for, because he's on the price floor. Now, finally on the tier list, B-tier constructor-wise, the first one, if you're just worrying about budgeting, again, would be Aston Martin. However, if you're going off pace and what we've seen in FP2, then it looks like Williams are the way that you would want to go here. I quite like the idea of potentially getting Williams in if you went for that differential pick and stuck with the triple McLarens with Williams constructor. Now, heading into the chips this weekend, and it's a lot easier heading into Monza. Realistically, like I mentioned, every weekend now, if you haven't used Limitless, you've just got to get it out of the way. The returns diminish the longer you hold on to it because teams improve over the season. Your team basically starts to look more like Limitless the closer we get to the end of the season. So you want to get that out of the way. Also on a low overtaking track like Monza, and a track where the top teams have normally scored big over the last few years, it makes sense to go for a Limitless here. There could be a big gap in points between A tier assets and B tier assets. Then the other big one would be wildcard, of course. If you were like me and you went Aston Martin last weekend and you want to get out of it, wildcard is the perfect thing to do. If you want to go to a 4A build, this would be a wildcard option. If you want to sort out your B tier drivers, potentially bring in a Hadjar if you didn't have him, potentially look somewhere else, like Sainz looks pretty good over to someone like him, then you could start looking at a wildcard. However, just make sure if you do wildcard that it's costing you a -10 or a -20, because if you can just get to it with 0 negative transfers taken, just do that instead. And then finally, final fix, always an option. Let's see what happens in qualifying. I'm looking at you, Lewis Hamilton. Let's say Hamilton only qualifies 11th or 12th with his 5-place grid penalty. That could be 16th or 17th, and that looks very, very juicy. Would it actually be juicy? Because like I mentioned, it's quite easy to get stuck in a train at Monza, and I don't think there's going to be any safety cars to spruce it up. Potentially not, but that's the sort of thing you would be looking for to final fix. And then the other chips like extra DRS, autopilot, realistically you want to be saving them for a sprint race weekend. Again, if you're using autopilot, most weekends it's not going to be like Zandvoort where it's a 50 points difference between Piastri and Norris. So for me, it's still a sprint race weekend where you'd want to be trying to push for that autopilot use. But now we head on to my favorite part of the video, the team selections. Now to start off the team selections, I'll talk about the cheapest team variations you can really look into at the minute, and that would be the usual malarkey of Piastri, McLaren and a second A tier constructor, and this weekend it looks like Ferrari. So this would start off this weekend with Piastri, Hadjar, Lawson, Sainz, Bortoleto, McLaren and Ferrari. Now realistically you could go something like Sainz down to Colapinto if you needed that just little bit extra of money, but really I'd recommend really trying to get to that Carlos Sainz here. It cost 113.2 million. This is my foundation for the weekend on these sorts of teams. Now you can improve upon it if you go to Lawson over to Fernando Alonso. This would cost you 116.2, and then you could also go Alonso over to Albon if you got 119.9. But after this, I'd recommend not doing anything, because then you could be looking at better teams elsewhere, which I'll be talking about soon. And also, I just don't think there's any better B tier driver assets than these four at the minute, with Bortoleto being great for budget on points, Hadjar the same, and the Williams duo looking so dominant right now. Now heading into the 4A builds, this is probably the foundation of the 4As that I would look into this weekend. And I say the foundation because I'm still not completely in love with this situation we have here. But starting off, we have Piastri 2 times, Leclerc, Colapinto, Bortoleto, Hadjar, McLaren, Mercedes. This is a hefty price, but it just doesn't look like we can be using a Mercedes driver asset this weekend. It has to be Leclerc for that driver of the day potential. Now, there is still Mercedes, that's the issue, and also the B tier drivers aren't perfect. So what I would do in this situation, if you have more funds to move around, well, initially what I would do is straight away try as hard as you can to get to Piastri, Leclerc, McLaren, Ferrari. Then from here, if you can move Colapinto up to Lawson, I would do that. And then Lawson up to Sainz, I would do that as well. And then I'd just go on from what I've been showing you this entire video so far. Bortoleto up to Alonso. Alonso up to Albon. I don't think anyone has the money for this, but that's the gist of it for every team out there. However, the main idea of it is if you can get to a 4A team of Piastri, Leclerc, McLaren and Ferrari, it looks very, very good this weekend. Who'd you put the 2 times on? You could have the differential of having it on Leclerc. However, I think I would stick with Piastri for now. You know, consistency. We know McLaren are still going to be fast. Ferrari might be showing us stuff in FP2 that's not legit. We'll never know until quali. But at the end of the day, if you can get these 4 drivers into your team with free B tier assets, like a Colapinto, like a Lawson, like Bortoletto, Sainz, whoever it is, I would recommend this as one of the best routes possible this weekend. However, if you cannot afford a 4A build, then this is the next best build for you, and this is the Williams build. Now, you can see it's very similar to the build I just showed, but basically it drops down Ferrari to Williams. Now again, the foundation starts off with Piastri and Leclerc. Now you have 2 routes that you could take. Initially, you could either instantly go up to Lando Norris if you want that consistency of McLaren and you don't want to take a risk with Ferrari. And then you do the exact same thing over here. Bortoletto up to Fernando Alonso. Fernando Alonso up to Albon, depending on what your valuation is right now and depending on your free transfers. Or you could do the exact same thing where you keep Leclerc and do the exact same thing over here where you start off with Gabby Bortoletto, Liam Lawson, whoever it is. Then you go Bortoletto to Alonso, good on budget, good on points. Alonso up to Albon. Again, that's the gist of it. That's exactly how I would want to go with every single team. And those are the technically triple McLaren teams this weekend. So realistically, these are the triple McLaren teams this weekend. Which one is better? The 4A with Piastri, Leclerc, McLaren, Ferrari, potentially a -10 in there, or these teams? And I think it's going to come down to one key piece of information for everyone out there individually. So if you are like me, and in Zandvoort you went for an Aston Martin team, then potentially you might need to try to get free transfers to head up into the next race weekend to improve your team elsewhere, potentially go back to the 4A teams, and then potentially Williams is the way to go here. No -10s involved, you keep a free transfer going into the next race weekend. Or if you started with Ferrari, most likely the best way to go would be to keep Ferrari, get in Leclerc, and try to see which teams you could build. I will tell you that these are my 2 options personally right now as well. Which one will I be picking? I don't really know till FP3. Let's see if Williams hold on pace. Same for Ferrari. Whichever one does, I'll most likely be going that way. And finally, on team selections, I'll show you my limitless team for now. And you might notice a name I actually haven't mentioned much in this video, and that would be Lewis Hamilton, purely for the potential of that 5-place grid penalty. I think if you want to go for a limitless, sometimes you've got to risk it for a chocolate biscuit. Piastri 2 times, that's playing it safe with Norris, Verstappen, Leclerc, all pretty normal names. Well, realistically, it would be Russell over Hamilton if you want that safe option. However, if you want to go for that 5-place grid penalty potential, I think it's worth risking it this race weekend on the limitless. But that is my favorite limitless heading into FP3 right now. But that is all for now on this post FP2 video for finalizing your F1 fantasy teams. Now, like I mentioned at the start, please feel free to leave any comment about your teams, as there's so many variations of teams, and I really just want to try to help everyone out as much as possible, as it is quite hard trying to figure out exactly what we need to do, and I'll try to help out down there. And if you still don't know what to do with your teams, an hour before the deadline, I will be live streaming on the FanAmp channel with Adam and Terry, and we will be helping all of you go through your F1 fantasy teams and helping you with your selections to finalize for the Italian Grand Prix. So thank you all so much for watching this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you liked today's video, and I'll see you all very soon. Enjoy the rest of your day and enjoy the rest of your week.